So I want to take a moment to give a brief introduction to who I am and why you should be listening to this story. So my name's Bieber. I'm a 43-year-old mother of three. I live on a farm in the mountains of southern Portugal with my two youngest daughters. My daughters have never been in school, and I myself consider myself to be somewhat of an alchemist and an anarchist. It is my hope that women listening to my story will be able to garner their own power from my words and see themselves for what they are, which is divine creators housed in magical bodies, bodies that are never, ever, ever trying to harm them. I wasn't raised in an alternative household, and my mother tells me that my own birth was a very traumatic one at the hands of the medical system involving surgical instruments. I had all of my recommended childhood pokes. I took antibiotics and pain relief as recommended, and by the time I fell pregnant, for the first time at the age of 23, I was very much indoctrinated into the medical system and of the belief that not only were there were germs out there that could make me sick, but that symptoms were a sign that something was going wrong in me, and that pills and injections and doctors would always hold the answers to these things. And I consented to many forms of what I now consider to be barbaric forms of mutilation, in that I had my first two children cut out of me, one via C-section at the age of 23, and my first daughter via an episiotomy at the age of 33. I also chose to have silicone breast implants put in when I was 28. I spent over a decade on antibiotics for recurrent UTIs. I was on 40 milligrams of Prozac a day, fluoxetine. And I heavily subscribed to the narrative that doctors knew my body better than I did. I spent the first 2 years of my son's life as a new mother petrified, specifically of two things, meningitis and cot death. I was convinced that there was a deadly pathogen out there that could come and latch onto my son at any moment and cause his brain to swell. I was beyond paranoid that I could sneak into his room one morning, peek into his cot and find him lifeless. These intrusive thoughts were what dictated my every choice as a new mother, and the things I would see on TV and, the programs I would expose myself to only verified this. I welcomed the pokes and the advice of doctors. I believed that I was giving my son the best chance of, having a healthy life. And as a result, my son, who is now 19, was fully poked and medicated for the first 10 years of his life. And my awakening to the fact that the Western medical model is nothing more than a demonic drug cartel happened in 2014 when I was 33. I was pregnant with my second child, my first daughter, and when my waters broke at 35 weeks, I allowed the fear mongering and the programming to take over, and I admitted myself to hospital. And she was born via episiotomy, which is where the doctors cut into your vagina to pull your baby out. And my partner, my girl's father later told me, my ex-partner, the girl's father later told me at the time that the medics had commented to him that they'd never seen someone so calm. They'd never seen a birthing woman so calm while being cut. And this was because I had completely disassociated from my body. During that birth, I remember leaving my body. I remember them watching them cut me. I remember thinking how wrong it all was, how barbaric and medieval it seemed. I wasn't giving birth, I was being sexually assaulted. And it was my daughter's birth it was my first daughter's birth, my second child's birth, that began my descent into conspiracy theorist. I realised that the school and the medical system were designed from conception to keep us sick and programmed. And I realised I didn't want to co-parent with the government anymore. And so I began spending all of my spare time researching terrain theory and how to keep the terrain clean and how to detox. And I threw out all cleaning chemicals and I hired a homeopath and I began filling my cupboards with expensive vitamin C and Manuka honey and elderberry syrup. And every time my daughter had a cough or a cold, I would like emphatically declare she's going through a detox, you know. Oh, she's been exposed to some form of toxin, but symptoms still worried me, even though I had now dismissed germ theory and I was down this, you know, rabbit hole of all is not what it seems when it comes to health. I was still very much of the mindset that it was terrain theory and that symptoms were still something to be frightened of. And so by the time, well, you know, when 2020 rolled round, that's where I was. I was this terrain theory devotee, you know, symptoms, lumps, rashes, coughs were still things to worry about. But as long as you were obsessive about keeping your terrain clean, that would give you the best sort of fighting chance of not getting sick. And I will share in another episode my story of 2020. It was during 2020 that I began a completely new life in a foreign country during the pandemic, with no money, no plan, single mother with 2 small children. But during that first lockdown, I took my new 2 daughters and I started a completely new life for us abroad. And it's what I've personally observed happening in my own health during that time, as well as the health of my children, that what I now know to be true, and a truth I would love to see resonate with so many people, is that symptoms are nothing at all to fear. It's neither the germ nor the terrain. It's a misalignment that happened somewhere in your past that caused a shock to reverberate through your psyche and your body that then went on to produce the symptom that is there to help you survive. It's not there to kill you. And this is my own personal interpretation and understanding of Hammer's 5 biological laws, which is the premise of the German new medicine theory. And before I continue telling this story of healing what I absolutely believe would have been labelled as lymphoma had I gone to a conventional doctor, I want to encourage anyone who resonates with what I say to really read up on the 5 biological laws yourself. There's some incredible books and YouTube lectures out there. And, you know, listening to podcasts and scrolling Instagram reels isn't enough to gain knowledge. It's the light of knowledge that will illuminate the darkness of fear. And so if you feel fear around symptoms, knowledge of how the human body works, knowledge of the 5 biological laws is what you need. And that knowledge will only come from you taking time to educate yourself. You know, I watched YouTube lectures like I was going to get quizzed later on the subject. Like I would take notes, I would pause, I would highlight, I would, you know, I would further research words or phrases. I devoted everything I could to really, really, really understanding this. I know, as a self-sabotage coach myself, I know the only way to have something seep into your subconscious is to be consistently and repeatedly exposed to it. And so I knew that if I wanted to understand how the human body works on a cellular level and how it heals on a cellular level, then I had to spend my every spare moment consistently, repeatedly knowledging up on that. And, you know, thank God I did, because when I did go on to develop some really rather intimidating, frightening symptoms, earlier this year, well, depending on when you're listening to this, earlier in 2023, that fear was then so much easier to recognize and overcome rather than fall victim to it. And so my story is that in April of this year, well, I'm actually recording this on New Year's Eve, so last year, I guess, but in April of 2023, I discovered a lump in my neck. I'd been suffering from dreadful night sweats that had lasted for weeks. They were so severe, I was having to strip my sodden bed sheets every single morning. My weight had been dropping off, and I'd also developed a really angry rash across the back of my neck that was so severe that I'd had to resort to shaving the underside of my hair. I share pictures of this and the full story of what was happening in my life just before I developed these symptoms. They developed shortly after a visit from my ex, where I felt deeply betrayed and devalued. I share this over on my Substack blog. I will put the link in the comments. It's completely free to subscribe and read too. But when I first discovered this lump, I was sitting in my garden and I, went to brush a fly off my neck or something, and there it was. There was a lump. It was unmistakable, and my initial thoughts were those of fear and dread. Intrusive thoughts came thick and fast. You're going to die. A lump means cancer. Cancer means death. I didn't immediately feel the lump and think, yay, a puzzle to solve. What is my body trying to tell me? No, I immediately felt very frightened, very anxious and very scared. However, I never once felt scared enough to consult an outside authority. Not once. I never once felt the pull to go and get officially diagnosed. I knew what they would diagnose me with. When I had my breast implants removed in 2018, I was 37, and the surgeon who removed them told me that they'd been ruptured for a while, and he confirmed that there was silicone in my lymph nodes. So I have silicone in my lymph nodes, a lump on my neck, a rash on my neck, night sweats, weight loss. I certainly didn't need a diagnosis from anyone other than God. I've written on my Substack my thoughts around this, but in the word diagnosis, in my interpretation, is to grant someone godlike authority through your body. Dia meaning through or across, and the word gnosis, which is spelt with the Gnosis. The word gnosis literally means the word of God. And so I believe that if you're receiving a diagnosis from someone in a place of authority, you're granting them godlike access through your body. And with what I now know to be true around the 5 biological laws, I believe that the shock of a dire diagnosis is one of the leading causes in the spread of disease throughout the body. I put spread there in inverted commas because nothing other than frequency can spread throughout the body. Cancer can't spread throughout the body. You can't detect cancer in arterial blood. Blood donation is not tested for cancer. The shock of a cancer diagnosis from someone you have placed in a position of authority, though, the frequency of that shock and the belief can certainly spread throughout the body. And so I had no desire to consult with anyone or to seek any form of diagnosis from neither a Western doctor nor an alternative healer. I'm more than well versed enough in what the Cure Cancer Naturally Brigade have to say. Begin juice fasting and alkalizing and shove coffee up your arse and increase the red light therapy and go as clean as you possibly can with your diet, and above all, cannabis oil. I know what they have to say, and this still supports the theory that your symptoms are there to harm you. And I just no longer believe that to be true. I wanted the symptoms to go away because they were uncomfortable, but not because I feared them. I was recognizing at this point that the symptoms were just indicating a glitch. Like they were showing me where I was falling short of being fully me. That is my interpretation of this. Now, like I said previously, that was not my initial reaction. My initial reaction was one of absolute fear and massively intrusive thoughts. And I had to coach myself like I would a client. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor and having the conversation with myself about what I knew to be true in that moment. I had to ask myself, how do you know you're dying? What do you know to be true? All you know to be true is that you have a lump. That is all you know to be true. And there isn't, at the time of recording this podcast right now, I have no symptoms. I have no lump. I have no rash. I have no night sweats. My weight has stabilized. All of my symptoms have vanished, every single one. And there isn't a magic technique or a method that I can share with anyone other than saying it was a culmination of practices that brought me back to myself and to a place of love and forgiveness. And again, forgiveness for myself more than anything using the theories of the 5 biological laws, I was able to approach my symptoms with a practical mindset. I was able to ask myself the questions. If the lump is caused by the silicone, then why has it appeared on your neck? Why not your armpit or your breast? Why the right-hand side of the neck and not the left? Why did it appear when you felt devalued and betrayed earlier on this year? Why didn't it appear as soon as you got the implants taken out? Or why didn't it appear when you had the implants in? Why now? And the answer to these questions came through so thick and fast that they were so obvious to me. It was like all the symptoms appeared when I felt devalued and betrayed, and they were on my neck because it was connected to my ex, and that was where he would always kiss me when we were being intimate. Speaking of being intimate, I began tracing those dastardly UTIs that I'd plagued me for over a decade. All throughout my 20s, I traced them back. Well, that was my time when I was working as an escort, which, yes, my time over a decade in the sex industry is definitely another podcast episode to come back to as well. But a UTI in the 5 biological laws is a boundary violation, and I define anyone who is exchanging their body for money doesn't feel a boundary violation somewhere along the way. So that whole time I was putting it down to being the sex I was having. It wasn't. It was the act of the boundary violation was what was causing the UTI, and the alchemizing and healing of my symptoms involved practices that brought me back to a place of love and forgiveness. And that is when the true healing began to take place. When I recognized that the ultimate betrayal and the devaluation had never come from an outside source, but from my participation. It wasn't being devalued by my ex in my 40s that kickstarted these symptoms. It was me betraying myself and devaluing myself by getting breast implants in the first place. Because let me tell you, dear listener, there is nothing more devaluing than sitting on a surgeon's table and being drawn on with marker pen and being told where you can be improved upon. Similarly, it wasn't my ex cheating and betraying me that I needed to work through and forgive, but rather the parts of me that had repeatedly ignored the many, many, many red flags that he presented throughout our relationship. I used many different practices in a bid to move this blocked energy out of my body and to infuse my body with love and forgiveness. I wrote letters out and burned them. I wrote poetry that I share on my Substack blog. I danced, I've punched pillows, I've howled at the moon, I've journaled. I've nurtured my inner child by, spending days collecting seashells and reading Enid Blyton. I've held my own hand every night as I've drifted off to sleep, stroking myself and telling myself how safe and loved I am. I've read book after book after book on emotional healing and taking radical responsibility for yourself. I've developed a daily breathwork practice and a daily Kundalini yoga practice, and I've started having regular massage treatments, not for any health benefit, because I now realize the importance of platonic, loving touch on the human body. And I also prayed day and night out loud, and often I would hold the vision of the healthiest, most energized, happiest, most joy-filled version of myself, and I connected with her as often as possible. I stare at my naked body in the mirror every day and affirm to my reflection in the deepest parts of myself that we are healed, we are whole, we are healthy, we are children of God, and that this magnificent vessel would never try to harm me. It will only ever reveal the deepest truth to me. And the belief that symptoms are to be feared is so deeply ingrained in all of society. Medical dramas like Grey's Anatomy and Holby City all focus around deadly diseases and symptoms being markers that are leading to your demise. There will be those listening to this now, I'm sure, thinking that the fact I'm still here, having done nothing, means that definitely wasn't cancer. That would never be diagnosed of cancer. It's not cancer that she's overcome. There's no way cancer just vanishes if it's left alone. And I know from the influx of angry, triggered messages that I receive, and I have spoken about this before, that the vast majority are just going to cling steadfastly to the belief that, I've not healed anything. The symptoms that have gone prove that there was nothing there that serious to begin with, and I can kind of agree. But only to the degree that I believe that sort of either all symptoms are cancerous or none at all, because otherwise a lump is just a lump. It is just your body's way of attempting to survive and delivering a message to you. If you want to do your own reading on this, I would highly, highly recommend the book, The Psychic Roots of Disease by Bjorn Eibal. I believe I'm saying that correctly. But the underlying factor in anyone's healing journey needs to be faith in a higher power, yes, but faith in your own magical, magnificent body. Faith that your body is doing everything it can to ensure that you survive. It's my personal belief, as I've mentioned earlier, that receiving a diagnosis from someone that you have placed in a position of authority is one of the most dangerous, if not deadly, energetic exchanges that you can consent to. And, we will never be able to study or observe undiagnosed, untreated, unobserved disease by the sheer fact alone that it would no longer be undiagnosed and unobserved once studied. The same way that there will never be studies on unassisted, unobserved sovereign birth. There cannot ever be due to the observer effect alone. there's a phenomenon in which the act of observation will alter the behaviour of a particle. And so all you'll ever have to learn from are the stories of women who have had unobserved, unassisted sovereign births, or these stories like mine that I'm trying to tell of women who have healed while being unobserved and undiagnosed. Because that's the only other thing we have are the stories that you're being given from your doctors and from the TV and from the medical cartel. You're going to have to see, there are stories of people who are just spontaneously healing, and I am one of them. I didn't need to know what my diagnosis would have been in order to heal from it. I just knew that the night sweats and the rash and the lump were my body's way of telling me that shit isn't right. And that if I no longer wanted to experience those symptoms, and if I wanted to feel healed and whole, that I was the only one with the authority that could do that. I was the mother 15 years ago that would regularly medicate her child for fevers while being paranoid about meningitis. I was the mother who only 4 years ago would immediately reach for the Manuka honey and the elderberry syrup and the colloidal silver the moment my girls had a cough. Now the first thing I reach for is prayer and rest and connected time together. I no longer feel fear around any symptoms that my children exhibit. And that's been the biggest liberation for me on this journey. And it's the message I hope that mothers listening to this will take, or at the very least, that will be inspired to learn more about the healing principles of the 5 biological laws and take that time to knowledge up, because like I said earlier, the light of knowledge will illuminate the darkness of fear, and becoming knowledgeable is your responsibility and yours alone. Thank you for listening.